Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the second part of the Toronto Domestic Violence Symposium, June 7th, 2014. I would like to take a quick moment to acknowledge some of the people that have made this event possible. AVFM has contributed $6,000 to this event, the biggest supporter and the organization that has been attacked more than anyone other. Currently, there is a demonstration going on in Detroit right now as a group of people are attempting to stop the first international men's conference. We have had death threats against some of the presenters, and it is a tragedy that we are having this sort of blowback against an organization that is simply trying to make life better for men and boys. I would also like to thank my father, Peter Vincer, who founded the Canadian Maltese Charitable Service Trust 20 years ago. It is that organization that has undertaken this domestic violence symposium. He has put in tremendous work over those years, raising hundreds of thousands of dollars, putting children through school, assisting with some of the flood situations in Romania. We have had issues in Haiti where we had, within 48 hours, field hospitals set up. I would like to also acknowledge, and I'll say it in Hungarian, Farkas Zsuzsa, who has taken tremendous effort, volunteering her time to ensure that the cash flows properly, that the books are right, and other nitty-gritties that are necessary for an organization to run smoothly. I would also like to thank CAFE, who are also supportive of this event. They have taken tremendous time to tweet, to get this on social media, and we thank CAFE for that. I would also like to thank Canada Court Watch, Vernon Beck, who has spent some 20 years working tirelessly to venture into the courts, to deal with people one-on-one, and he will be presenting again today to intimate, to show what actually is happening in our society that is causing some of our difficulties. But at this point in time, we need to move ahead as our time is limited, and I would like to introduce to you a man, a criminal lawyer, who has decades of experience in various aspects of our judicial environment. He has tremendous experience with what the police do that brings people before the criminal courts, where he needs to, or he's taken the position to defend these people, many of them who have been wrongly accused, convicted, to bring about some semblance of justice. I would like you to put your hands together for Walter Fox.
Hi. Thank you for the introduction. I appear here as a criminal lawyer who will bring you reports from the front, as well as I intend to speak a little bit about the history and background of how we got here. I think it's important to know what it is that brought about the situation that exists in the criminal courts. Anyone who's had anything to do with family law knows about fathers who are charged with domestic assault. And domestic assault is a relatively recent construct. I've put on the blackboard or on the green board that I've been a criminal lawyer since 1967. And 1967 is a significant date. I guess anyone looking at a historical development or pattern can pick a date and work things around it. For me, it's 1967. That was when I left law school and I started to practice law. The first thing to note is that that was not the first, or that was just the earliest beginnings of the first wave of feminism. I went through law school without there being preferential treatment for women. The affirmative action that we see now in the universities, which is now sort of engulfed the universities, and in the year 2000 was the first year that the number of graduating lawyers in Ontario, the majority was women for the first time ever. And that may be a good or a bad thing in general terms, but as it relates to criminal law and as it relates to family law, it may well have been something that we didn't understand was, at the time, was not a good thing. Not that women are not competent, intelligent, and capable. As a Democrat, as a person who believes in democracy, you have to believe that over a broad range of people, people are all the same. If you take a large enough group of people, it will have the same proportion of crooks and scoundrels and saints and wonderful people who do wonderful things. That's one of the fundamental problems as we look at feminism, because feminism can't admit that there are women who are psychotic. Feminism can't admit that there are women who are personality disordered. I'm not actually saying that right. A feminist can't admit that there's one woman who's psychotic. A feminist can't admit that there's one woman who's personality disordered or venal or vicious or malicious or violent. And that's one of the inherent and deepest problems in feminism as a philosophy. But I moved a little bit ahead of myself. When I started to practice, the domestic phenomenon, by the way, is this working properly on a technical level? Attila? Is this working properly?
Perfectly.
All right, thank you. One of the phenomena that I knew about very early on was that a woman would complain to the police that her spouse or her husband had assaulted her, and when she came to court, she wouldn't go ahead with the matter. She wanted him back home. So this was a phenomenon. I didn't understand it. There may have been people who understood it, but this is the law, the criminal law world that I came into, and the domestic situation was that. Inherently wrong, something was wrong. Now, I'm going to take us to a bit of political theory and history. In the British system, which we've inherited, but not perfectly, we've imperfectly inherited it, the Attorney General was the person who administered the courts and was the lawyer for the government. And in any lawyer-client relationship, the lawyer has to be at arm's length. It's not good for the lawyer to be your brother-in-law or your brother or your father. The lawyer should be somebody who's detached and can give you objective advice. And in the British system, the Attorney General would be a member of the governing party, but would not sit in the cabinet. The Attorney General was the administrative and actual head of all of the prosecutors. So that the idea of how the courts ran was supposed to be separate and apart from party politics and party theory. When the political system was translated to Canada, and in particular, I want to talk about Ontario, they put the Attorney General in the cabinet. Now, what this meant was, in England, if you didn't like how the courts were running, you could go to the Attorney General's riding and send him or her a message by having them defeated. In Canada, the Attorney General, sitting in the cabinet, runs the courts based on the party's theory and ideology. And so if you don't like what the Attorney General is doing, you not only have to throw the Attorney General out at the election to send a message, you have to defeat the whole party. And that's one of the problems we encounter. Now, how does this play out? Well, in the late 70s, there was a Liberal government in Ontario. The Attorney General was a man named Ian Scott. Whatever you want to say about Ian Scott and his politics and the kind of things he did or didn't believe in, he was a seasoned trial lawyer. He knew how the courts ran, and he had some respect and admiration for the courts, and he paid attention to the administration of the courts. One of the things that started to develop in the late 70s was the notion of feminism. And he was convinced to be both the minister that administered the courts and the minister for women's issues. And he wore two hats. Now, it was not a problem because he really could keep these things separate, and the courts ran, and the whatever work he did on behalf of women in his position as a cabinet minister on behalf of women kept pretty much separate. In about, I'm trying to get my dates right here. I guess I've said this wrong in terms of the dates. In 1990, in this province, the NDP government was elected. And a man named Howard Hampton became the Attorney General. Hampton was also a trial lawyer, and he was also dedicated to the proper administration of the courts, and he wasn't a problem. After 2 years, he was replaced by Marion Boyd. Marion Boyd, first and foremost, was not a trial lawyer, didn't know anything about the courts. She was not a lawyer at all. And in fact, she was a self-described feminist activist. And for 3 years, she administered the courts in Ontario and left us a legacy that only now is starting to collapse. Two of the things that happened that you have to note is in our system of government, we have the bureaucrats. They're the permanent government. And above them, or imposed on them, we have the politicians. And whatever the political party happens to be that's in power or runs a minority government, they're transient. They may not be there in 4 years or 3 years. And the Attorney General of the day may not be there later. Well, Marion Boyd filled the bureaucracy with feminists. It was so bad that when the Conservatives were elected in 1995, the Attorney General was, his name, he just died, he was the Federal Minister of Finance, Flaherty, Jim Flaherty. And Flaherty agreed to meet with myself. I wasn't the driving force in that meeting. We had 2 meetings with him, in fact, and at one of the meetings, Senator Cools was present. He agreed to meet with a constituent and 3 other people to talk about what was happening with men. Now, get this. He would not meet with us until after 7 o'clock in his office. This is the Attorney General of Ontario, because he had some concerns for the reaction of the feminists in his bureaucracy, feminists who had been placed there by Marion Boyd. I guess I don't have to, maybe I should have mentioned this earlier. You could understand that the administration of the courts should be neutral, and it should be motivated by the best interests of the community at large. But as a result of Marion Boyd's being the Attorney General, we had a bureaucracy filled with feminists. Well, what did this look like in the court? Suddenly, we had specialized courts for domestic assault. We had specialized police officers. We had specialized prosecutors. These were specialists who were there to deal with only one kind of problem. I can tell you, as a practicing lawyer at the time, if you had a client charged with taking a submachine gun into a Max Milk store to rob that store, and some male person was accused of throwing a chicken wing at his wife, your case with the submachine gun would wait, while the scourge of modern Canada, this fellow who threw a chicken wing at his wife, his trial would take priority and precedence. This went on for a number of years. We all knew that there was a serious problem with this. None of this made any real sense. And this has continued from in or about the mid-90s until recently. Now, there's another thing that was happening at the same time. In the late 70s, I guess the early 80s, a professor, a feminist at New Hampshire, a fellow named Strauss, he determined that since men were the perpetrators of most violence in the community at large, it was obvious to him that men were the perpetrators of most violence in relationships. And so he constructed a survey in accordance with what the soft sciences of sociology lay down. And you have to know this. This is real important. That for any survey or any study to have any value, it must be replicable. That is, somebody else can pick up the same survey and go do it somewhere else and see if they can get the same result. The second thing is that it must be peer-reviewed. It must be sent out to totally independent academics of the same, who are in the same line of work, and they will discuss and pass on whether the methodology was appropriate. So he does his first survey, and it comes back that men and women are equally violent in relationships. He says, wait a second, there's something wrong here. He does it 3 times, and he gets the same result. And ever since then, every reputable source of learning that has done a survey about the initiation of violence in relationships has come to the same result. Now we switch to Canada. The feminist movement really gets started in 1990 here in Ontario. Someone would argue with me it was started earlier. In my perception, it's about 1990. In about 1990, in these buildings, women who are there on some kind of affirmative action basis, some of them, maybe not all of them, are roving through classrooms shouting down professors because they've determined the professors are not feminist or not feminist enough. Now keep that in mind, because those people in the 90s, those women who were doing that in the 90s, are now academics, they're now judges, some of them are physicians, some of them are psychiatrists. These are people who rejected the broad teaching of anything and insisted that there was only one way to understand things. The Liberal government, the federal government, actually, this really gets started with the Conservatives when Kim Campbell is the Prime Minister for 3 months. She provides, I believe, in those dollars, and I haven't got the year correct, and you'll have to forgive me, but it's around the end of the 80s, early 90s. She provides $10 million, I remember that number, for a study, to set up a committee to study violence against women in Canada. That study goes across the country. She gets defeated in the next election. The Conservatives are decimated. There's only 2 Conservatives in the House, and we start into the Liberal era. That committee goes across the country and comes up with a report, the final report on violence against women in Canada. That report, in the introductory letter signed by the president of the committee, which included someone named Peter Jaffe, and I'll get back to Jaffe and Marion Boyd in a moment, that committee, in the introduction to the report, says, we found, and I'm trying to give you the exact quote, we found that women in Canada were tethered to a life of violence that women in no other part of the world have been exposed to. Can you imagine? It's unbelievable, but there it is. And in about the first or second chapter, they say, the fact that only some men are violent in relationships. And remember, the academics know that it's the initiation of violence in relationships is equal as between men and women. But this report, which is just rank, goes on to say that while only some men are violent, all men profit by the violence of some men against women. We're all in on it. That's not her words, but those words come out in a Globe story just recently. So, as things go forward, the Americans, the Brits, everybody is learning that the initiation of violence in relationships is equal as between men and women. In Canada, it's called wife assault because there's nothing equal here. This is men assaulting women only. And this goes on for 10 years. And the feminists are getting a free ride. And now you've got the great feminist intellectuals, the great feminist leaders in Canada. You have Michelle Landsberg, you have Judy Rebick, and you have a woman called Sona Thaberi. They now rise to prominence through this era because the federal government, the liberal government, there's no conservative opposition. The opposition is the BQ. The federal government is funding and financing a group called NAC, the National Action Committee. It's a National Action Committee of the National Organization of Women. Now, the National Organization of Women is real interesting. The Chrétien government is funding them. They claim to represent 3 million women, the National Organization of Women. And what they claim is, for example, if somebody is on their board from the YWCA, they claim all the YWCA members as members of the National Organization of Women. At a certain point, and I'm jumping ahead here a little bit, the Chrétien government refuses to fund them. Straight out. The Chrétien government says, okay, here's what we'll do. For every cent you raise, we'll go dollar for dollar. NAC says, okay, 3 million people, 3 million women, National Organization of Women, and after a year-long campaign, they raise $7,500. Okay, so now they start to go into decline. They are having a field day and a party. They're getting money from the Chrétien government, and nobody in Canada really knows that the initiation of violence in relationships is equal as between men and women. They have in each of the criminal courts, there's 5 of them in the Toronto area, they have one courtroom dedicated to the prosecution of men. And this is going full blast. I once did a calculation as to how many restraining orders there were made against men, because every once in a while there's some violence committed by a man who was on a restraining order, and maybe we don't have enough restraining orders and so on. But if you contrast the very few number of men who violate a restraining order with the number of restraining orders that are in existence, it's minute. It's less than 0.00%, but nobody ever talks about it in those terms. So this thing is in full blast, and there are some of us who know about the real statistics. And any criminal lawyer, and it's not me, I'm the middle of the mainstream on this, in Toronto will tell you about this dreary procession of decent, reasonable, hardworking, respectable pillars of the community who are walking through our offices charged with domestic assault. And so I guess I should go into that for a little bit here. What was going on? What was this about? Well, the belief was that domestic assault by men was a serious problem. The example, of course, was the prosecutors would rather prosecute some guy who threw a chicken wing at his wife than prosecute somebody who took a submachine gun into a Max Milk store to rob it. What was causing that? It was the belief that there was this epidemic of violence by men against women, and in Canada, until the year 2000, we didn't have the statistics. This was called wife assault. Finally, in 2000, Stats Canada did the survey and concluded that, like everybody else who'd done a responsible, replicable, peer-reviewed survey, it was Canada, actually Stats Canada was just slightly outside the norm. They found that of all the Canadians they surveyed, and I think they surveyed like 500,000 men and 500,000 women. I think it's slightly less, 400,000. They found that slightly more women were the victims of assault in relationships than men. The numbers were 7.5% of women were assaulted in relationships and only 7% of men were assaulted in relationships. But we had this big court machinery that if a man showed up at a police station and said, I was assaulted, there was no way the police would prosecute that. Not because they didn't take it seriously. You've got to understand the police force in Toronto was 7,000 strong. I don't know what the numbers are today, but in 2000 there was a lower proportion of women even than there is today in the police force. They all knew about it. If somebody is arrested on domestic assault in Toronto, I can probably guarantee if they have no criminal record, no real criminality in their past, they will be treated like guests by the police officers, because the police officers are men most of the time, and they know the problem. They know what's going on. They know that it's a very tough time for men on domestic assault. All of them, if there's a 40% divorce rate in the community generally, it's roughly the same for police officers. So they all know this. So that when I was talking yesterday about men doing time for FRO violations and doing 90 days, the jail guards know the problem. Any male anywhere in the system knows that there's something out of kilter and it could be them at any minute. The police officers don't believe that they will ever be child molesters, drug dealers, or murderers, but they all know they could go through a divorce at any time and end up in the same situation and condition. So now, Stats Canada says the initiation of violence in relationships is equal as between men and women. What does the Attorney General do? They're stuck with this whole big construct. They've got specialized police forces, specialized prosecutors, and specialized courts. And Peter Jaffe and Marion Boyd, Marion Boyd's no longer the Attorney General, the NDP is no longer the government, but these are people who have achieved some prominence. They're screaming that something has to be done to stop violence against women. And so one of the things that comes forward, and Attila, and I'm sorry I don't have this so as organized as I'd like to, they invent the inquest. Why do I say they invent the inquest? probably inquests have existed as long as human beings have had, were sentient and understood anything about their world. An inquest is an inquiry. That's what the word inquest means, is an inquiry into the death of a member of the community. Every community, probably since the dawn of history, wants to know how somebody came to their death for a couple of reasons, at least. One, we don't want anybody else coming to their death by the same way. And number two, we don't want to forget anybody, and we don't want to remember that people died and that they weren't throwaway objects, that there was some concern about how that happened. A woman named Bonnie Porter became a coroner. Now, this is important. Inquests are not run by judges and lawyers. The person who conducts an inquest is a physician. And an inquest jury is there to help the coroner come to a conclusion as to how somebody met their death, so that we don't do it again and nobody is forgotten when they die, if they die from unnatural causes. Bonnie Porter decides actually there's an educative function, a feminist educative function. And the first inquest is called the May Isles Inquest. And here's how it goes. I can't recall, I believe it's Randy Isles. I believe the male person was Randy Isles, but it doesn't matter. I'll speak about the male person and the female person. The male person had an extended criminal record. The female person had none. They had been in some kind of relationship, and after the relationship had ended, he had come back, and for whatever reason, and I don't recall, and I don't know that it's relevant to what I'm talking about, he kills her. Now we're going to have an inquest, and it becomes a feminist extravaganza, because Bonnie Porter, the person who decides when whichever death should be the subject matter of an inquest and is going to preside over the inquest, she has determined that we're going to look at this. Keep in mind, at any court hearing, even a family law hearing, which we all know is one-sided, fathers can bring a lawyer. Fathers are there and they participate. Even if they're told they can't participate, they're there. The male person who is alleged to have committed this offense, maybe actually he did, I'm not arguing about that, is represented by no one. So now they have an inquest, and every government agency that ever came in contact with either of these two people, the housing agency, the health ministry, every single bureaucratic agency in the province is there. There are representatives of the shelter movement. Remember the shelter movement? You must have heard about that from Aaron Pizzey and Senator Cools. So the shelter movement is there. The feminists from the Attorney General's office is there, and there's nobody there representing the other point of view. Nobody there discussing what could have happened, what could have motivated him to do this. Is he like all men, or is he a special, unique whack job? Couldn't be done. They conclude at the end that the province, and this is led by Peter Jaffe, they come out with 156 recommendations to pretty much reorganize the entire province so that violence against women can be repressed. There's no talk about violence against men. There's no talk about what happens to men. They're not interested. This is a one-sided feminist extravaganza. Eventually, it's a little sidebar, eventually, one of the lawyers for one of the bureaucracies becomes appointed a judge. And she writes a letter to the Attorney General saying, hey, I was on this inquest, and we came up with 156 recommendations, and I see Crown attorneys coming into my office, my court, and they're not taking it seriously. pretty much improper for a judge to do that. And eventually there's a hearing and it's determined that, well, maybe it was improper, but no harm, and she keeps her career. Well, the next inquest in this list, and you'll see why in a minute, the last inquest is the Hadley inquest. Ralph Hadley was 32 or 33 years old when these events took place. He had lived across the road from, and I've forgotten her name, the woman, and had always been in love with her from being a teenager. She went off and married somebody else. And she had 2 or 3 children. I'm reaching back to 2000. She had 2 or 3 children. One of them was profoundly ill, handicapped, and it's just a heart-rending story. She splits up with her husband and moves back to the area where Ralph Hadley was living, and they take up. His lifelong dream has come true. The woman he's in love with has come back. They get married, and he undertakes looking after this profoundly handicapped child. Let me put it this way. One of the facts that came out at the inquest was that this child at 4 needed diapering, if you can imagine changing a 4-year-old. But he did that. Now, I forgot the most important part. We get wind of the Hadley inquest. We realize, and there's a small group of us at the time, that this is going to be another feminist extravaganza. So Brian Jenkins, who was the then president of FACT, Fathers Are Capable Too, and I go down to this hearing and say, we want standing. And Brian says that, I remember this clearly, he says, we have counseled over 7,000 men, and to our knowledge, no one of the men we have counseled has ended up killing anybody or killing himself. We can't take credit for it, but we have a lot of experience. Bonnie Porter says, okay, you're in. You can have a lawyer representing FACT at this inquest because I believe, she said, you have something to tell us. So, back to Hadley. Ralph Hadley, somewhere along the line, starts to realize his marriage isn't working. So he suggests they go to marriage counseling. She goes for the first or maybe second time and then stops going. He continues. He's morose, he's depressed, he feels he's going to lose what was his family. By the way, they had a child, and the child was months old. Eventually, on Christmas Eve, I think it's Christmas Eve, certainly at Christmas time, his wife's half-sister comes to him and she says, do you want to know where your wife is? I'll take you there. Because she wasn't at home. So he goes with the half-sister. She takes him to a house. She opens the door. They walk into this house, walk into the bedroom, and there's his wife in bed with another man. He suggests to her, or he says to her gruffly, it doesn't really matter, come home. She comes home, she gets up, she gets in the car, and on the way he just loses it, and he pushes her and he pulls her hair. He may have struck her, all right? As a result of that, he gets charged. Now, there had been a previous charge, which somehow I haven't told you about. He'd been charged with somehow abusing the 4-year-old. But that charge had gone away because there was just no evidence to support it. was a housekeeper made an allegation. It was either him or the housekeeper that caused the red marks on the child. The housekeeper went to the police first. It would appear to me that he had done nothing wrong to the child. But because of that previous involvement with the law, there's some question as to whether he's going to get out on bail. And he does get out on bail. The Children's Aid comes and says, okay, Mrs. Hadley, you've got two choices. You either take him out of the house or we're taking your children. The Children's Aid, she decides to stay with him. The marriage wobbles back and forth. There's an interesting moment where the Children's Aid worker comes to see him and in the presence of his parents says to him, he hasn't been convicted of anything yet, "You're the criminal, that's why we're doing this." The Children's Aid person at the inquest denied saying that, but Hadley's parents were the witnesses. Eventually, in a late August, early September, they're separated, and he goes to where she is. He takes along a rope, a gun, and some other things that would indicate that he had an intention to kill her. And he kills her, and he kills himself. Now, for whatever reason, we're now in an inquest. And the story that I told you about the report on violence against women is now the center point of that inquest. And the province of Ontario sends a lawyer to represent the province. All the bureaucracies are there, the women's shelter groups, all of the Ministry of Health, anyone you can think of that, any kind of department of the provincial government has somebody there. And the government itself has somebody there. And it never occurs to anybody, as we're going along, the document we hear most about is the report on violence against women. And it doesn't occur to anybody that the province of Ontario has sent a lawyer who's the husband of the woman who had written that part of the document in the introduction that says women in Canada are tethered to a life of violence that no other woman in the world is exposed to. At the same time, and there's always light on the horizon somewhere, a fellow named Fekete at Trent University, he had written a book attacking that report, a qualified academic, and I, as counsel for fact, used that book to attack the report on violence, and that's what was going on. The report on violence is pure garbage, bad workmanship, just nothing right. They either lied or just were so stupid they couldn't get it right. One of the small examples, they say in the text, elder abuse. 2/3 of women, elderly women, can expect to be abused by their spouse, right? And they have a footnote. And you go to the footnote, and it's I think by Fiebert. The footnote was by Fiebert, a study done by Fiebert, which said exactly the reverse. 2/3 of elderly men can be expected to be abused by their spouse. And when I raised this at the hearing, Bonnie Porter ruled it out of order. We don't want to know about elderly people. I'm saying it's got nothing to do with elderly people. It's got to do with the craftsmanship in the work in this report. They either lied or just were too stupid to get it right. As the inquest began, and we were loaded, and Brian Jenkins, the statistician, we had all the statistics about violence, we had all the information we needed, which they hadn't had at the May Isles. And all of a sudden, the great feminist philosopher, thinker, Michelle Landsberg, and by the way, there must have been a bully somewhere in her life, because her husband on the CBC said, Michelle says, she gets up in the morning and flies into a rage. Obviously, she's going to spend the day looking for somebody to express that rage. Michelle Landsberg is screaming, close this inquest down, because it comes out that the wife had a criminal record for fraud, which is a crime of dishonesty. Hadley was completely clean. Hadley was wrongfully charged, and on and on. Eventually, the inquest concludes, and we end up with another set of recommendations. They brought in Peter Jaffe. They got the recommendations they wanted, but we never saw that kind of inquest again. All the inquests we see now are legitimate inquests that relate to how, where, when, and why someone lost their life. So where have I brought us to? Has anybody been following me? Because it's been a bit of a ramble. Anybody? What year am I at? Do we know? All right, let me tell you. Let me tell you what's going on now. When the domestic violence courts opened, women jumped in with both feet. Most of the time, they didn't want their husband arrested or in jail. They just wanted to cool out a situation. They found, when they called the police said to them, "We accept and acknowledge the feminist philosophy. You women are children. You don't know how to run a marriage. You don't see the inherent danger in living with a man. You can't live with him anymore until this case is over." And the women were dumbfounded. And it got so bad for this philosophy in the courts that as of today, women are not reporting. They don't want to have anything to do with the treatment they get by the criminal courts. If you sit in a domestic violence court today, you'll see the prosecutor come in with a list of 10 files. I'm picking the number 10. Half of them, the prosecutor will say, well, we can't prosecute, she's not coming to court. The other half will end up in peace bonds. They're closing domestic courts around the province. Women are no longer interested in what the courts will or will not do. We'll get back to a very reasonable place. For the few men who are really violent, they will be charged. For the women who are violent, they will still mostly get a free pass. But eventually that will sort itself out. And as the speaker was saying yesterday, Samri was pointing out that for the first time at a conference, a women's group was saying, we're not attributing level of violence to one gender or the other. We're talking about these things generally. So that's a positive sign. I don't know how much longer you want me to go until I could probably go for another hour, but I'm tiring as well.
Yeah, if you're tiring, it's up to you.
Okay.
I wonder if perhaps you could speak to the effect of Miriam Boyd having on the plea bargain with Karla Homolka.
She was the Attorney General and signed off on that. I don't know what else I can tell you. She was the one. In fact, there's a great anecdote, and it goes like this. Peter Jaffe, you need to know that Marion Boyd was from London, Ontario, and so was Peter Jaffe. Peter Jaffe was a PhD in psychology, not in psychiatry. They developed something called the London Family Court Service, which everybody thought was a government agency. It wasn't. It was a profit-making organization where assessments, the matrimonial assessments, would be done. In the course of the Bernardo case, the prosecutor presented Homolka as a battered woman, and Peter Jaffe was the expert to explain what a battered woman is and how a battered woman syndrome will affect a woman. Now, I don't know if anybody here knows, is there anybody here who doesn't know the Bernardo case? It was a case involving a particularly Paul Bernardo would rape young women who were brought to him by Karla Homolka. They would drive along, somebody was walking down the street, Homolka would say, "Would you like a lift?" A woman and a man in the car, the young woman would get in. Eventually, Bernardo would rape her. Bernardo had been the subject of a number of investigations. He had been known as the Scarborough Rapist. When he hooked up with Karla Homolka, the girls would end up dead, sawn into pieces, and their bodies actually broken into pieces with an electric saw. Bernardo's defense was, "I'm a rapist. I'll do my time. I never killed anybody. I never hacked up anybody's body until Karla came along." And that Karla was the one who was the leader on that part of their horrific crimes. So Jaffe gets in the stand and says, "Look, this woman brings young women to be raped by Bernardo, and then these young women are all chopped up, and you have to give her a break because she's a battered woman." And as Jaffe was ending his evidence, Justice Lesage said to the jury, I'm sorry, I guess I've left out a step. Homolka, as you can understand, was in the witness stand for an extended period of time, being cross-examined by the lawyer for Bernardo. As Jaffe got off the stand explaining how this was all a battered woman syndrome, Judge Lesage said to him, "How much time did you spend with Karla Homolka examining her?" And he said something like 6 or 7 hours. And Judge Lesage said, "Yeah, but the jury's seen her for 17 hours. The import of that is they'll know better than you, Dr. Jaffe, about Karla Homolka. Does that help you?
That does help.
Okay, if there's any questions, if this has been a bit, maybe it's been a lot incoherent, I've done my best. There's a lot of information. It's not, I haven't organized it all that well, but I think it's something we all need to know. And thank you for listening to me.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Walter.
You're welcome. What time is it?
It's approximately 11:30, I believe.
I've got to run. Thank you.
Does anybody have any questions for Walter Fox?
I was just going to say, is this about the
Wait, just a minute.
I was going to say, is this about the time McMurtry said to the lawyers, with this new domestic violence, your gravy train has come in?
I know of nothing like that, and domestic violence was never a gravy train for lawyers. The government moved very quickly to stop that. Let me give you the scenario. A person comes into my office, a male, decent human being, done nothing but work all his life, look after his family, and pay his bills. He says, "I'm on bail now. I want to go home and see my family. My wife wants me home. What can you do for me?" Well, I talk to him about the case, and I say to him, "In my opinion, you are not guilty of anything." He says, "Good, let's have a trial." I say, "Fine." He says, "How long will it take?" I say, "We can't get into court for a trial for 8, 10 months, maybe a year." He says, "You mean I'll be on bail for a year and I can't see my family?" And I say, "Yeah." And he says, "How much will this cost?" And depending on the year or the time, it's anywhere between $5,000 or $7,000. Well, he's supporting a family. Nobody expects to be sitting in a lawyer's office with a lawyer saying, "I need $5,000 or $7,000 to help to get you through this." He goes back to court, and there's this attractive Crown attorney person, and they say, "Look, if you plead guilty, we'll get you a discharge. And if you take the PARS program, we'll let you go home in 5 months or 4 months." So he's got one or the other. He's got me, and I'm going to make sure he's not convicted of anything. And here he's going to get a discharge, which is not a conviction, if he takes the PARS program and they'll vary his bail for as long as he likes before he's prepared to enter a plea of guilty. So that killed domestic assault. Occasionally, there was a client for whom it was absolutely crucial because of the work they did crossing the border, any one of a number of things, and we would get retained. But the general run of it was quickly absorbed by the government coming up with that. And that's how they manufacture statistics. That's how they get to say, we're doing a great job. We've got all these men rushing into court to plead guilty because they can't get home to see their family. I've got
Walter,
to.
I'm going to ask you one.
Okay.
I have one last very important question to ask you, and that is, and this has been debated by Lauren Honickman and some John Oakley on the Oakley Show. What actually happens to the records of someone that has been charged with a criminal code violation? It ends up on CPIC, but I'm wondering, even in cases where the charge is unconditionally withdrawn, what happens to the data on the CPIC record?
It's worse than that. If there's been a complaint made and no charge has been laid, the police investigate and decide there's no charge. That's recorded somewhere, and if the person, usually the male, wants to get a job with children or be a hockey coach, they have to get what's called a vulnerable person search. And the fact that somebody has been investigated but not charged will come up on that. Now, there really is a feminist angle to this. And here's how that works. You may recall the case of John Doe and the Toronto Police Service. Jane Doe and the Toronto Police Service. Jane Doe, there was someone prowling in the downtown area, a serial rapist. He came to her apartment, came in through the balcony door, and she was raped. She sued the police. And she said, "You had a duty to warn me." In fact, there's some feeling that the police not only didn't warn her, but kind of used her as bait. She wins the case. She collects. She doesn't collect from the police officer, and she doesn't collect from the police service. She collects from their insurers. I fully believe that now that the fact that every single interaction with the police can be made available to destroy your life is driven and motivated by the police insurers, who are saying, we don't want anybody saying the police didn't tell me that that guy or that guy or that guy is a criminal, and we'll have to pay out. So it's this kind of crass commercialism, and people's lives are destroyed. And it's really unclear. Each police jurisdiction that I deal with, and I have lots of clients who have been found not guilty or should never have been investigated, each police jurisdiction has a different rule. It varies from police force to police force. It varies right across the province. It's a very bad situation. It's got to get cleared up, but I don't think it'll get cleared up until we grapple with the fact that it's driven by the insurance companies.
And one last bit. This is
One last
very, very important.
I told you I could go for another hour.
Very important, because this is what people are asking me, and it's a question that has been put through in mainstream media, is once this is recorded, as you say, it's worse than what I had suspected. Is there any way of removing this data in its entirety from CPIC or the police record?
You can never get rid of a police contact. Never. The police hang on to every piece of information. The question we have is, what is it fair and proper for them to release? But if you have a contact with the police, they will keep it forever. The example I give is this. I grew up in downtown Toronto. My parents, I'm Jewish. And at that time, Kensington was primarily a Jewish market. And I remember being 10 years old and going with my father to buy bread on Sunday, because for Jewish people, Saturday is the Sabbath. And so the Jewish bakeries wouldn't be open, but they were open on Sunday against the law. And I remember going in and coming out with my father, and there was a policeman who took our names for buying bread at a bakery on Sunday. That record is still there in the police information that they keep. Okay? But the question is, should it ever be released? Should anyone else ever know about it? You could understand that the police want this information if they're ever going to lay a charge or they're ever going to investigate somebody. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I actually.
Just 1 second.
Fine, speak up loud.
I've got to run.
Yeah, I know a fellow who was charged with domestic violence, and what happened was he hired a lawyer to defend himself, and then the Crown came to him and said, "We'll drop all the charges. All you have to do is sign this peace bond." Then we looked around. I knew him. We looked around on the internet and found this letter written by the RCMP that discusses CPIC. And in this section, it says that if you sign a peace bond for domestic violence, that goes into CPIC. So we thought about it, and actually, if you're found guilty of a charge, you can wait 5 years, request a pardon, and that can potentially be taken out of CPIC.
Not quite.
But I guess the thing is, the Crown, no one told him that if he goes across the border, CPIC is available to the border
Americans,
guards,
yes.
and it goes to the States, then it can go all over Interpol around the world.
Yes.
So if you're totally innocent, and they say, we'll save you expenses, he spent about $40,000
Yes.
for these charges, which they had 3 charges against him. The Crown kept these charges in place. First, they said, we'll drop all 3 charges, simply sign the peace bond. Then, as it moved through the system, the Crown dropped 2 of the charges, and he still had to do this. Then, he was found innocent at the end because he was innocent. But it ruined him financially, and he never did anything.
And those are manufactured statistics. Those are, the whole thing is wrong.
Yeah.
And this is not me as an advocate on these issues speaking here. Any criminal lawyer in Toronto will agree with will understand what you've just explained and will agree with me that there's something dreadfully wrong about this.
This is fairly recent too. This isn't 10, 20 years ago. This
Right.
is happening now, and it's just the Crown. They want to drop. They'll say they'll drop everything. Just sign this piece of paper, sir, and then it all disappears.
Okay,
So-
but what I was saying, and the reason I was saying it was diminishing, was because the women weren't interested. Obviously, his wife was pushing this. If she had refused to come to court, the whole thing would have gone away, which is happening in most cases. And by the way, 5 or 10 years ago, you couldn't get a peace bond. There was no interest in a peace bond. And you had to take what's called PARs. I defy anybody anywhere to find published the underlying therapeutic theory of PARs.
Yeah, and I can get it to you. I went through PARS myself,
But you can't find,
but I have all my records from PARS.
you may have all your records, but you will never find anywhere the theory on which PARS operates.
No, okay. I misunderstood.
Recently I was up at the courthouse, and also at the courthouse in Milton, and also at the police station in Halton, and they have flyers about similar courses like that. I guess it's PARS. I don't know.
PARS is the only one that up until about 2 years ago that the Crown would accept. Now I happen to know an awful lot of PARS because I did a 3rd inquest, the Osadash inquest coming out of Brampton.
Yes.
And nobody could explain the underlying theory of PARS. There are 2 broad theories. They go like this. What I call the common sense theory is anybody can be pushed into violence if they sustain enough pressure. Any living human being, male, female, old, young, that's how it can go. There's the other theory, that men are inherently violent and that we culturally encourage men to be violent. All right? Now, whichever theory you adopt, broadly speaking, and there's all kinds of gradations in between, leads you to a therapeutic model of some kind to eradicate the violence. All right? And if it's inherent and it's cultural, there's one way of dealing it, or there are a number of ways of dealing with it. And if it's situational, there's another approach entirely. So I'm sorry, you wanted to say something.
Yeah, I was up there, and I know there's a program, it's called Caring Dads. Then I looked around, and there's nothing that says Caring Moms. And
Well-
but so I'm thinking this is, then they make comments like, for the dads, it's to, I think it's kind of undermines them. It says, learn ways to improve their relationship with their children. And then it says, that's for the dads. Then it says what mom and kids can expect. And then for that, it says, ensure that she and the children are safe.
You're looking tyranny right in the face.
This is
You're
at the
looking.
police station, though. They hand this out to people at the police station, men at the police station, and it's at the courthouse. There's nothing on the other side, though.
Oh, you're shrugging your shoulders and holding your hands out in a gesture of frustration and futility. It's, in my view, and I'm a minority, because most people you'll run into will talk about the pendulum swing. And this is a pendulum swing and it'll swing back. In my view, this is pre-fascist.
Right.
A philosophy that says, amongst men, violence and violence towards women is inherent. Amongst women, women are benign and angelic and never do anything abusive or violent. That, to me, is a fascism. It is a denial of the democratic notion, which I started with. Over the broad range, you have to believe that there are as many psychotics amongst men as there is amongst women. And I have this wonderful phrase that I got from Senator Cools, both men and women, you have to believe that both men and women are equally capable of good and evil. And that document is evidence that the people who run the courts and the police department don't believe that.
I just find it troubling this when you go to the courts. It's at the courthouse and it's at the police station.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking, how
One,
do you get a fair shake?
you don't. You absolutely don't. This is an ideology. This is a received wisdom which has no basis in fact. In fact, all of the statistics are men and women are equal in these things, yet you will not see anything in the court system. There's no PARS program for women. If a woman is convicted of domestic assault, she gets one-on-one treatment. PARS program has a group theory. It's 10 or 12 men in a room being shamed. That's the theory of PARS. Nobody will admit it. I had occasion to cross-examine some administrative people at PARS who couldn't give me the theory. One of them dared to say to me, well, it's accountability and it's making men accountable for their conduct. And I asked, the next question was the obvious question. After someone has stood up in a courtroom and said, yes, I'm guilty, what more accountability can you get for them? How can you make them more accountable than in a public place where the press or the media may have an absolute right to be present? How can you make them more accountable than that? Well, it's some kind of scheme, it's some kind of scam where some bureaucrat or some private contractor is making money for humiliating men. Most of you don't know this. If you're in the PARS program and you're separated from your wife and that part of the problem in your life is gone, you have a girlfriend, you have to give them your girlfriend's name and address so they can call her and warn her about you. Okay? Am I right?
Yep.
Okay? So it's just designed to humiliate men. Yes, ma'am.
Can you tell me a little bit more about PARS? I actually don't know. I'm understanding what it is, but I don't know much about it.
Nobody does.
Okay.
There are no statistics for PARS. The courts have been putting men in PARS programs for at least 20 years. You can't find any statistics about whether it works or it doesn't work. You can't find any information about the underlying therapeutic theory. You can't find anything about it. But if you take the PARS program, we'll let you plead guilty. You'll get a conditional discharge, and you can go home and be with your wife and children.
Can I interject with something
Yes.
really quickly? I just want to say, when I went through PARS, they had something which they called the hot seat. And what the hot seat was they had us one by one come up to the front of the group and sit in the seat and read off what was essentially an 85% pre-scripted speech about how we were 100% accountable for everything that happened that led to us being in PARS in the first place. There was absolutely no tolerance for the idea that it may have been a mutually aggressive relationship.
The word you may be looking for is situational. That it may well have been situational, or that you may well have been responding to aggression. They can't admit that that's possible. And that's the first piece of information I've actually heard from anybody about how PARS functions. But it's pretty obvious to me that it's the word Attila just gave me, a brainwashing session, and it's reminiscent of what we used to hear about Maoist China, about re-education. I see this branch of feminism that we're coping with today as a sinister political philosophy. And we have to, it's a tribute to the resilience and to the wonderful nature of Canadians that it hasn't engulfed us and it's been kept in a box. I have to go. Thank you very much for listening. Oh boy.
Is this, if the judge orders that you can't speak to the attorney cross-examining, is that a good point for?
I'm sorry that the cross-examining who?
The
You?
judge says, no, the lawyer's cross-examining the witness.
Right.
Each witness. The judge says you may not speak to the lawyer during the cross-examination.
Is that your lawyer who's doing the speaking?
No,
Is that?
this is appointed by the court. Court appointed lawyer to cross-examine a witness.
To cross-examine the wife. It's usually the wife. To any examine?
Underage children, below the age of
I
18.
don't-
He says you cannot speak to the lawyer during the cross-examination when 486 of the criminal code says exactly opposite.
I'm not sure about 486. I know this as a lawyer cross-examining. I don't like to be interrupted, but I don't know that there's any rule that says I can't be interrupted.
Well, there is a rule that says that the accused can consult with the lawyer during the cross-examination.
His own lawyer?
No, the lawyer for the appointed by the court. And it says while the examination.
Oh, I understand now. I know what
So
you're
that
talking
you can
about.
say, look, they're lying here, so change your tactic.
No,
And he says,
no. Well, I can understand that a judge might. That doesn't mean I agree with it.
Well,
A
the law
judge,
doesn't either. The law says it's-
so it may well constitute a ground of appeal. I don't have enough information to comment on that.
We can get some communication going, but Mr. Fox really has to go. He has a
All right.
wedding to go to.
Right.
Oh, excellent.
Okay.
Walter,
All right.
thank
Attila,
you very,
you're-
very
you're
much.
welcome.
You're an
Thank you.
invaluable asset to.
Because I have memory, that's all.
Yes, you have great memory.